You're listening to the Electronic Media Collective Podcast Network. Yeah, it's a mouthful. For more great shows like the one you're about to enjoy, visit electronicmediacollective.com. And now, our feature presentation.
Welcome to the exciting world of the movies.
Welcome back to the movie graveyard, everybody. We're settling in for another almost kind of mini special episode here. We're going to be talking about our favorite movies from the year 1981, and this one was a hard one. Let me tell you, there were so many movies. Who knew so many damn movies came out in 1981? Surely not me. Trev's not here yet. He'll be... Oh, I think I hear a door opening.
Hey, I'm getting the sitcom wacky neighbor entrance.
Here he comes.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
Trev, did you finish up digging up all those cinematic corpses from 1981 to bring in here tonight?
I mean, there was a lot, and I'll tell you what, man. I'm glad little 1-year-old Trevor didn't have like disposable income and the ability to go to the theater, because I wouldn't have known what to do with myself. Too many options, man.
Too many. And I didn't really do like a lot of dirt digging on like what the grosses of some of these, because there were so many damn like famous movies from 1981. But I would have to think some of these great cult classic movies had to take a bath financially because the competition was insane. Yeah,
I mean, like looking at the list of the top 10 grossers of the year, it's pretty interesting because you look at you look at some of the as you said, genre classics now, and a lot of those don't end up in this top 10. But number 2 of the year, On Golden Pond, the second highest grosser of the year, and the Four Seasons in the top 10. So, I mean, there was definitely some odd things there.
And I was kind of blown away by what number 10 on the list was, because honestly, I always thought that was a small little cult movie. I didn't realize that. I didn't realize actually tickets were sold for Time Bandits. But
yeah, no, I thought that was weird. And then just looking at the list in general, I mean, we've had this discussion a lot about the way cinema has changed and film distribution has changed and what kind of movies get made has changed. But you look at a year this packed, and what a strange year just in terms of the kind of variety you're getting. I mean, this is a year where a movie like Time Bandits could be a hit, but so could a movie like My Dinner with Andre, which is just two guys sitting in a diner or a restaurant talking about philosophy for 2 hours.
Yeah. It was an interesting year for sure. I don't know. This is just a bit of trivia. I don't think either one of these actors will be coming up on our list, but I will say I did find a bit of interesting trivia that 1981 was the year that Kathleen Turner and Tom Cruise made their acting debuts in different movies. So definitely, this is where the Cruise era begun.
And speaking of Cruise, this is also the year where Natalie Wood falls off a boat and drowns.
Very much. Some would say that's something that still needs to be looked at to this day, and still is being looked at to this day.
And there are also some who would say it should not be looked at this day, including, I believe, Robert Wagner and Christopher Walken. So
exactly, they're like what's his name? Good. They're like Harrison Ford and What Lies Beneath. They want to let this shit stay buried. So we're going to flip the script, and we're going to talk about actually what our one worst movie of this year was. And but before we do that, I'll just run down the Academy Awards, because I don't think any of these films will be on our list. I could be wrong, but... So the Best Picture of 1981 was Chariots of Fire. Best Director was Warren Beatty for the film Reds. Best Actor, Henry Fonda for On Golden Pond. Best Actress, Katharine Hepburn for On Golden Pond. Best Supporting Actor... hope I don't butcher this guy's name, John Gielgud from Arthur.
Yep.
Best Supporting Actress, Maureen Stapleton from Reds. And then Best Foreign Language Film, Mephisto, directed by Istvan Szabo from Hungary. But so pretty much you're looking at, with the exception of Chariots of Fire, pretty much all the major categories were either On Golden Pond or Reds. So this was a big, I guess what you call prestige picture. So that's going to lead me to my worst, and I kind of feel like a dick for doing this, because this is kind of like an asshole way to damn a film. But my worst film of 1981, and the reason I say that is because it was probably my most bored movie-going experience that I can remember in my life, to the point where it scarred me. I remember for years. But my most boring time in the theater was actually seeing the film Reds that year. Now, the reason I say I'm kind of an asshole is I was 4 years old when I went to see
I don't think
this.
you were the target audience.
No, I wasn't. But I just remember, because my dad was the type of person, he just, every week he just wanted to see a movie, even if there was nothing of interest. And he would just like, it wasn't like he was dying to go see Reds, but he convinced me and my mom. And I remember all three of us just being bored to tears of, the whole, whatever it was, the Bolshevik Revolution. To the point where, like, I've always been curious about that movie if I watched it as an adult, if I would think it.
I was going to ask, have you revisited it? Or...
I haven't, not since that theatrical viewing. So
it's interesting though, because Reds is actually a movie I've never seen, and it's one of those films that you and I are both cinema aficionados, and I think you feel like you should see those kind of classics. And there's just something about that one, and I like Warren Beatty, but too. I don't know, that movie just looks boring. Like it's never appealed to me in any way.
Yeah, it really does. So, yeah, Trev,
I think there was a brief era when I was a kid where I thought Reds was like a political thriller, like Warren Beatty, like involved in this, like, Soviet Cold War espionage thing. And then when I found out, it's just about a reporter who covered the revolution, it's like, well, okay, I can skip that.
Yeah, and I totally remember that was kind of my dad's pitch to get us in the theater to watch it, was he really thought a lot more was going to be happening with the revolutionary scenes. But when you read about the movie, it's really about one man's kind of personal journey of like being a reporter and kind of covering the shit. It's not really about showing these big sweeping epic scenes of revolution and whatnot.
Yeah. All right. Well, my worst film of the year, and this was even kind of tough because there was a couple I didn't like, and I was trying to think what really upset me the most looking over these films. And a lot of these obviously I caught up with later because when I was one, I didn't care if a movie was good or bad, obviously, But the one I kind of centered on is to me, ultra disappointing sequel, and I calling it a sequel is even kind of weird, but that's ostensibly what it is. But that's Shock Treatment, the follow-up to Rocky Horror Picture Show. I know it's, over the years it started to have the smallest of cult followings finally, I guess, but it doesn't deserve it. I think it is every bit as terrible as it was initially thought to be when it came out, and it was kind of a huge failure. And it wasn't even a respectable failure in the way Rocky Horror was. It just came out and fell flat on its face and never quite recovered. And there's good reason. I mean, if you go into this expecting a Rocky Horror follow-up, what you're met with is different actors playing Brad and Janet. And really the only kind of enjoyable thing about the movie is Jessica Harper as Janet is always awesome. Like, Jessica Harper's always great. But, oh man, the guy who plays Brad, Cliff DeYoung, he's terrible. And just the story. They
couldn't get Barry, what's his name, to come back?
Couldn't get Barry Bostwick. No, that's telling you something right there. Tim Curry wouldn't come back, so he's nowhere to be seen. And it's not even the same kind of story. It's Brad and Janet now live in this town that the entire town is a TV show that gets underneath this dome, and it's kind of everybody is forced to take part in different television shows. Brad and Janet are kind of forced to take part in this game show, which ends up with Brad on a almost Big Brother-esque reality show, and then Janet kind of is being groomed into a pop star. It's just a really, really weird movie, and there's a part of me that feels like I should like it because of how weird it is, but it's just I think it's a twofold thing, right? It's the disappointment of not getting a real Rocky Horror sequel with the actors you like, and then it's also, as weird as it is, the songs just aren't very catchy. Which is obviously a huge problem for a musical. So there's really not a lot pulling you into this one. So yeah, total bummer.
Especially
I think there's a reason. Yeah. Even today, right, when Halloween rolls around, you always revisit Rocky Horror, and inevitably I'll be showing it to someone and be like, oh yeah, what about the sequel? And nobody even knows there's a sequel still. It's just. This movie's just not even known. So
I still haven't seen it, and I have it on my Netflix list. I did come out on regular DVD a number of years ago, and it's one of those things that's on the list, but it always gets pushed down because other things get pushed up towards the list. You know what I mean?
Yeah, keep on pushing it.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you hear the songs aren't catchy. It's kind of like kind of what's the point? But I have to apologize, and I'll do my best to cut it out. But when you started talking, Trev. I very assholishly cleared my throat into the microphone directly. I pressed the button. I thought I hit the mute button, but I hit the camera button, so you saw a brief view of me
Oh, I
in
didn't.
my bedroom. But unfortunately, I totally coughed in the ears of all our great listeners. So I'll do my best to cut that out. But
Oh, or I mean, leave it in as an audio indicator of what the quality is of the songs and shock treatment. So.
I just don't want to blow anybody's ears out. But yeah. And I have a slight amendment when we did our previous show, one of the disappointing films of the year 1980. As you know, I famously listed off Motel Hell. I did a revisit this last week. The first half of the movie, I kind of had the same feeling I always did. Second half, like, it went completely off the rails, crazy, batshit. I kind of got hooked in. So I just want to clarify that for our regular listeners. I am no longer a Motel Hell hater.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, I look at it as a rough gym now, and not a a disappointment anymore. So yeah, that's it for the bad news. I didn't want to save it to the end and leave you guys bummed out. So let's go ahead and start talking about our favorite movies of 1981. I have 5. Trev has 5. We have not compared lists. I always love it when you do a list show, and it's always like the host always act like it's like a big thing. Like, oh, we didn't even look at each other's lists. But really, what does that even matter to the person at home? Mm-hmm. It's just like, to us, it keeps it surprising. For me and you, nobody else cares. So I guess we'll do that thing. My list is, I don't know, my list is kind of weird. I think there might be at least one film that we maybe will share in common. If one of us gets to it first, we'll just do that thing, Trev, where we kind of, say, oh, it's also on my list, but we'll just give our thoughts then, not to,
Yeah. I felt kind of weird about my list only because, when you do these kind of specials about this year, you kind of want your list to be a little surprising and varied.
Right.
And I'll admit that apart with maybe a couple choices on mine, I think mine's probably not going to shock people. It's going to feel fairly generic, but I think that's like a testament to the classics of this year.
Oh,
that I felt like they were kind of undeniable,
Yeah. Yeah, and there was one or two like huge name movies that it pained me to leave off my list. But again, not doing the best of the year, just really doing just a lot. Some of them came down to like, okay, I own all these movies that I got to cut off the list, and it almost came down to how many times do I rewatch it. So there was a couple that it was just that split kind of hair thing.
Yeah, that's what it really was tough for me too. What do I value at a certain point? Because I think what's more surprising to me about what's on my list is really what's not on my list. Because man, did I leave off a lot of movies that I still consider favorites, just because that's how stacked this year was.
Exactly, I was in the same boat. So I'll go ahead and get this party started. And I have a feeling this is not going to be on your list, but it's a very popular movie anyway. I'm going to go number 5 on my list. Most favorite 1981. I'm actually going to go with Disney's The Fox and the Hound, an animated film. And this is, I'm not really into that many animated films, to be honest with you. And even beyond just the nostalgia factor, but I really like this film. This film was a huge deal. I want to say it was the last really major. There was other animated Disney films that came out, but to me, this seemed like it was kind of like the last really big hit, major one of my youth, and it was actually new. It came out in 1981, whereas a lot of the other ones were just re-releases at that time from Disney. But yeah, I really loved The Fox and the Hound. Loved the characters. I loved how you get to kind of fall in love with these characters as their babies. And I mean, I think we all kind of know, Trev, that The Fox and the Hound is pretty much just an allegory for racism and trying to make up for the tar baby and past bullshit in Disney movies. And then, Uncle Remus and all that. But I really found The Fox and the Hound as a kid and an adult. I do own it on Blu-ray. It's just one of those rare times that an animated film is going to choke me up. It's going to, get me emotionally involved, and so much as, those, feelings I had as a kid watching it, but also now it still does it to me. So yeah, I'm going to go with The Fox and the Hound for number 5.
Cool. My number 5, man, this was like the tough one because I was like really kind of kept tossing up two in the air and kind of trying to pick on which one would fall on. Should I just say the one that didn't make it just for the hell of it?
Yeah, do it.
Yeah, so what barely making my top five, barely missing out on my top five was Stripes, the great Bill Murray comedy.
Yeah.
But it taking its place, again, this. I'm even going to say there are movies that didn't make my top five that are probably arguably better films than this. But as you said, a lot of this goes back to your nostalgia, how much you loved it as a kid, how much you still revisit it. And for me, Superman 2 still kind of stands really high up there for me. As a comic book fan, as a Superman fan, this was the Superman movie that I really grew up on. I feel like this is the one I watched on TV way more than even the first one. And I really like it. It's a film that's plagued by a lot of behind-the-scenes issues, but I always point to this as the kind of film that proves that that's not always the death knell of a film, because I actually really I enjoy it, and I think the odd mixture of Donner sensibilities with Richard Lester's goofy comedy kind of works. I love Zod and his henchmen. I had a huge crush on Ursa as a kid. I kind of still do. And
still on the spank bank.
Christopher Reeve will always be my Superman, and this movie is a big part of the reason why. I think it's just a blast. The final battle is great. As a kid, this was what the MCU of the time for us. It felt so big and so fun. And actually, I prefer the theatrical cut to that Donner cut that came later.
Right, and I feel like the Donner cut. At least kind of breathe some new life into this, because the Donner cut kind of came out not really at the dawn of DVD, but kind of right at the crest of when DVD was becoming like very massively popular. So I feel like almost in a weird way that that Donner cut DVD not only reintroduced the whole Christopher Reeve Superman thing to a newer audience, but I feel like it kind of got the ball rolling, it seemed like, for what would come like with the Bryan Singer Superman Returns movie.
Yeah. Well, I think that's even like what the Donner cut was kind of like. I think that release was tied into like Superman Returns. Yeah, it was kind of like a here's a promotional aspect of it or something. So
yeah. But that one didn't make my list. But again, that was like if we did a top 10 type thing, that would definitely have made it for sure on mine. I have to say, like, as hard as it was, and as much as you'll hear us bemoan we had to leave this or that off, that's almost the fun of this list. Is trying to do a top 5 is so damn hard for just about virtually any year, but especially when you get these super mega packed years. Like,
and this year in particular, as a horror fan, I was really struck by what a great year it was for horror.
Yeah.
And some of the like undisputed horror classics I had to leave off, like it was painful, but and some not classics, but also just like dumb slashers that I love. This year was full of them. So
yeah, I was gonna say it was in my top 5 to the very end when I had to cut it off, but there was not only so many horror films. Like, I honestly, if you're up for it, a few months down the line, I wouldn't mind revisiting and doing just kind of a quick pace show where we actually do a full top 10 each of just the horror films in 1981.
Oh, yeah, I would definitely be down for that.
Yeah, I think that would be fun just to, because even if first of all, there was so many damn slasher movies, and I had The Burning, which... The Burning is just one of those ones for some reason. I think it's mostly the special effects and some of the weirdness stuff that's in the movie and some of the score. But I mean, it's just a murderer's row, literally, of slasher films from that year. I mean,
yeah, and I'm not gonna give this title away. I think our listeners will probably know what I'm talking about. But just as like an example of that, this year saw the release of what I think a lot of people and me would consider maybe to be the best horror comedy of all time. And that didn't even make my top 5. So
yeah, okay, yeah, I know, and it's just like again, without giving away, but just so many even tiny classic gems. Like, just to throw out, because I don't think either of these are on our list, but just like in the same year, just wrap your head around this. In the same year, we had Friday the 13th Part 2, which is actually really established Jason as a character. And we also had Halloween 2, which was, Michael Myers coming back to make a lot of money. But just so much awesome stuff. Ghost Story. Even like the little, like, not so popular ones, like Bloody Birthday and stuff. Like, just really, like, awesome shit. Like, I don't know. So yeah, I would definitely love to come back and revisit and do a top 10 of just the horror films in 1981. So, number 4 on my list. This is not really a slasher, but it does have a lot of the suspense. I guess the thriller genre. Again, it's, with these lists of this time period, this director is going to show up on a lot of my lists probably for, depending what year it is. But number 4, I was actually going with Blowout, Trev, from Brian De Palma.
Oh, yeah. This is another one that I just keep saying it. I was like, man, how do I not have that? But
yeah. So, like, Blowout, if people aren't real familiar with it, because I remember Tarantino was, like, championing this film for years, because he loved it. He went to see it, like, 80 times or whatever in the theater, and it was one of those ones where it's, like, I guess the critics kind of got tired of the De Palma shtick or whatever, and I don't think it did real well financially, but it's basically John Travolta is a sound man for a horror movie, and he's out just recording ambient sound, kind of out in the woods near a bridge, and a car comes and what seems like a car accident, goes off the bridge, and there also happens to be somebody taking photos. So what he does is he takes his audio recording, because the titular blowout, the idea was supposed to be that the car tire blew out and that this politician basically drove off this thing. Very, very similar to wouldn't you say it's kind of similar to the Ted Kennedy thing, Trev?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, but Travolta feels like there was more than a blowout that happens, and he reconstructs with the photos. He almost makes like a stop motion thing. He cuts the photos out of a magazine, and then he uses his audio recording. And it always gets me the way De Palma, especially that scene, and there's a lot of like the awesome split diopter shots where there's like something in the foreground, something in the background, but both are in focus. Like, he does a lot of really cool shit, and there's a lot of really cool audio stuff, and there's an awesome Criterion Collection Blu-ray that I own. So there's a really nice kind of visually and audio version of this out there, and it just, for literally 1981, like, some of the techniques, like, I think it was really ahead of its time. And it's very much in the Brian De Palma style that, like I talked about, because I think Dressed to Kill was on my 1980 list. It does have that Hitchcockian feel, but it's just kind of cool, because I'm actually a Travolta fan. It's cool seeing him in this type of movie.
Great performance, too.
Yeah, one of his best, if not his best. Nancy Allen is great in the movie, and I won't spoil it, but there's, like, a really awesome climax to the film that visually is just, I think it's one of the best things De Palma ever did. So Blowout just being a great mystery, conspiracy uncovering type movie, exciting. It's also interesting that you have this guy who's recording sound for a horror movie. There's like a great, I don't want to spoil too much, but there's like a great opening where we kind of get a movie within a movie type thing. It's a lot of fun. I can't recommend Blowout really much more than I am. I love it.
Yeah, no, I love it too. Just curious, have you also seen Blow Up, the original film it's based on?
I actually haven't, to be honest with you.
But that's good too. You should check it out. The Antonioni film from the 60s. A really young and pretty hot Vanessa Redgrave in it. Nice. Same general idea, except with that one, it's a photographer instead of an audio engineer. So it's a photo he takes. Right. But yeah, that's cool too. I think I like Blowout a little bit more, just because it is a little more, modern and sleazy in that De Palma way. But
and it just has that, like, I don't know, it just has that visual atmosphere that we talk about nostalgia with films. Obviously, that's what we do here. This is a nostalgia-based film podcast, whatever. But I feel like sometimes there's nostalgia that's just based on, hey, I saw this movie when I was a kid and it was really fun. But there's also this kind of nostalgia where you appreciate the artistry and literally the techniques and tools and the type of cameras they used and whatever that no matter how hard you try, you can't recreate some of that stuff today. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. All right, well, my number 4, I wouldn't be surprised if this is on your list, Goat, so we'll see. But, what and how appropriate, because the man behind this is really enjoying a renaissance right now. It's genre film's favorite old grump, John Carpenter.
Yes.
1981 comes in with one of his stone cold classics, one of his many stone cold classics of this era. Escape from New York is my number 4. just a total, undeniable pleasure film. Kurt Russell, and to me, still his best role, Snake Plissken. The infamous Snake Plissken, who is tasked to save the president, played by Donald Pleasance, after his plane goes down in New York, which now in the future, I believe the far future of, 1992, I think, I believe is.
Was it? I thought it was 1997. I could be wrong.
Is that what it is? Okay, yeah, you might be right. Something like that, right? But it's the far future, obviously. New York has now just been completely walled off and is a prison where they send all the undesirables, and the president's plane goes down, and Snake Plissken is given 24 hours to retrieve him and save him before an important conference he was scheduled to give a speech at. A lot of just great, character actors in the supporting roles. You got Harry Dean Stanton and Ernest Borgnine, Isaac Hayes playing the villain, Adrienne Barbeau looking amazing.
Yes.
And just that, great Carpenter music and the cinematography, and just obviously the thing that propels us along, though, is just the ultimate kind of badass character of Snake Plissken, who just does not give a shit about anyone but himself and is just kind of forced into this situation. And it really is it's a different kind of anti-hero. I think, we've had a lot of characters inspired by Snake Plissken ever since, and I think I think the temptation now is always, and this is what everyone gets wrong, or maybe not wrong, but it's what they feel like they have to do, is they're always a piece of shit, but with that slight heart of gold you can see peeking through. And Snake doesn't have that. And that's what I love. It's just, he really is what he is. He's what he is on the surface. He doesn't really care about doing the right thing. He just cares about doing the thing that suits him. I mean, there's a slight moral code there, but it's completely different than what you see in characters. Like a Han Solo is more traditionally good, right? Whereas Snake is just wow, that I wouldn't want to be around that guy because bad things are going to happen.
Exactly.
And yeah, I mean, it's just fantastic. It's I feel like it's the kind of film. I think this is true for some of the films we'll talk about today. But this is the kind of movie that I think you could release now and it would still be just as successful because it just still works.
Oh, I agree 100%. And actually, I'll use this time to talk about the film as well because this was actually the next on my list. Escape from New York is number 3 on my list, and I just echoing kind of what you said. I think there's all the scenes of Call Me Snake and all that kind of shit. But if you really want to boil down the difference, like you said, the difference between Snake Plissken and then those other gruff heroes, just watch the scene where he's I can't remember if it's the theater or where he goes into it, and he literally just walks by a lady getting pretty much raped and just keeps walking by. Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, it's I love it. And I also love that they depict it it's not just he's the biggest piece of shit in the world just to be one. It's they really depict that, he's living in this time when, basically, people are being demonized, criminals are being demonized to the extent that they're thrown into this area that, just literally everybody's going to die, one way or another. It's such an out of control. It's not even a punishment, really. It's just a death sentence. And, we kind of have Donald Pleasance as this kind of president who's kind of, as you get to know a little bit more about him, you realize he's just a big phony or whatever. So I love that Snake kind of embodies, I feel like the way he is and the way they created him to be in the film was really to be a mirror of the decaying society itself. You know what I mean? Yeah,
and it's interesting too because now when I watch it now with more of an adult look at it, you're struck by something I never thought about as much as a kid watching it, but this actually, New York seems like where Snake should be, right? And you get the feeling that if he wasn't forced to be there and wasn't on this mission that he doesn't want to do, he'd actually be pretty happy there. And actually, he'd probably have the run of the place pretty quickly. That would be his kingdom. And it really is where he belongs. And I think that's kind of interesting, too, just that you put him in his element, actually, and then just force him to be having to work for someone else. That's the problem.
Right. I mean, I think that would really be the great... almost the pitch, if you were to go back and how they always kind of rumored and talked about if you were to do something like Escape from Las Vegas, how they talked about, I think you do it to the point where you put an older Snake Plissken as basically being the Duke of, the new Duke, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And you could introduce new characters and kind of, I think that would be interesting to see what a guy like Snake has up his sleeve when he's kind of in charge of, some lawlessness and whatever. But yeah, and totally, I mean, obviously, it's just the whole thing is anchored by that awesome Kurt Russell doing his best Clint Eastwood impersonation thing. But I think definitely kind of what some of my sentiments were Blowout were, just like, you know, Brian De Palma could have only made Blowout at the time period the way he did, you know, with kind of the equipment that was available and where his mind was at. I think Escape from New York is another one that with the visuals and the music and the effects, like the effects of the time, the way all that blends together. You know, Carpenter, you know, like if John Carpenter would have, you know, waited 10 years and made Escape from New York in 1990 or something, I don't think it would have come out visually with that level of grime and see, because like they literally, if people don't know, they actually shot this in St. Louis where there was like such a terrible ghetto. They actually had like a run of like a bunch of city blocks they were just allowed to just trash up, and they brought in like part of a carcass of an airplane for the crash airplane sequence. I mean, I just don't think even 10 years afterwards they would have been able to film things and made things look the way they do in this film.
Yeah, no, I think that's proven by the sequel, right? Which also proves how effective this movie was. This movie was so perfect that when it came time for Carpenter to do a sequel, all I could really do was remake this one, right. Almost scene by scene. And interestingly enough, the sequel comes in 1996, 1 year before this movie takes place, which is kind of funny. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Escape from LA. That's probably a conversation for another time. Yeah. But man, like I said, this one is just fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, Escape from LA, I think probably the best thing you can say is, like, you're going to watch it to get your Snake Plissken fix.
Yeah, it's watchable because Snake is still great. Yeah. But that's about all you can say about it.
Yeah, that's about all you can say about it. And, you know, I mean, without going down the rabbit hole, because it's another movie for another time, that movie had a lot of behind-the-scenes production problems as well. With, you know, effects not getting, like, literally not getting completed, period. Just, okay, throw this out. You know, Paramount really put him in a bad spot. I don't know how great it would have been to begin with, because, like you said, it pretty much is a remake of Escape from New York. But I do know that some of the very top complaints that I always hear about that movie, I know for a fact are, you know, from the behind-the-scenes shit. It really was the studio's fault.
Yeah. And it really is. I mean, you just touched on what it could be, but this is one where, as much as I don't really like the second one and the reputation the second one has, I think in recent years with Kurt Russell kind of getting some of his badass mojo back, thanks to Tarantino, I really do feel like, you know, we've had like Indiana Jones come back and some of these other, like, you know, franchises resurrected. I gotta imagine there's definitely a place for old Snake Plissken, and seeing Kurt Russell pick that role up. I mean, I would be super excited about it. And, you know, Carpenter seems to be kind of rejuvenated again with this Halloween stuff that's going on. I don't know that he's looking to direct again, but if he could like choose a director maybe and still kind of oversee it, I mean, I would be all in for an old man Snake movie.
And you wouldn't really, because I think also a mistake that kind of happened with Escape from LA is you really. Not only is it not necessary, but you actually really shouldn't make it very high budget. I think. No. Yeah. I think if we had somebody, you know, I don't know if Jason Blum would be involved in a non-horror film, but if you had a producer like that overseeing a director, like I think James Wan. If I had to pick somebody to do an escape movie that wouldn't be Carpenter, I think James Wan. If you look at some of his less popular movies like
a Death Sentence.
Yeah, I kept want to say Death Wish, and I knew that was wrong. But Death Sentence with Kevin Bacon, I think he's got it in him to do something like, you know, like he's kind of catapulted into A-list or whatever. But he still likes to do a small budget. I think if you did a $20 million Escape from whatever with, you know, Carpenter and his son doing the score, and you had a good director like James Wan, you know, and Kurt Russell back as Snake. I mean, I don't think you would lose money on that one, and I think it would be, you know, it would kind of not necessarily right the wrongs of Escape from LA, but it would kind of, you know, like in the series on a better note, you know. Yeah,
I agree. I would. Well, you know what? Let's you and I call them up and pitch this. I'm guessing they probably just haven't thought of it until now.
They're like, guys, there's this podcast out there with about 200 listeners, and these guys know what they're talking about. We should listen to them. No, we shouldn't just do a movie about a ghost stuck in a cell phone. We should We should do more escape from whatever bullshit. But anyway, Trev, go ahead with your. It's your turn to do your number 3 on your list.
Yeah, so my number 3 is another one that's not too shocking. This is another interesting one because it's such a good film. I actually prefer the sequel, but this is still so awesome that it had to make my top 5, and that's Sam Raimi's The Evil Dead. So this makes my list because it really is. I was just watching Eli Roth's History of Horror recently. The AMC series he's been doing. I enjoy it. It's pretty much
it's fun.
It's fun. Like the way I kind of take it, just to get off on a little tangent about it, is you can watch it and be kind of cynical and say, like, well, I'm not learning too much from this or anything. But what I liked about it is I realized as I get older that when I was younger, I would watch specials like this and it would introduce me to a lot of stuff. And I kind of look at this now as like, well, I might not be learning anything, but there's probably some like 15-year-old horror fan that's watching this. And this is the first time he's hearing about a lot of these movies. So there's always a value to these every few years to make a new version. And when they got to talk about Evil Dead, I was actually struck by what Tarantino said about it, where he was talking about the visual style of it and how it was filmed. And he said, as a young film fan, when you saw this movie, you were kind of like, well, why would you want to make a movie in any other way? Why would you want to film anything that doesn't look like The Evil Dead? And that's what I took from this. I actually think, and I don't think I'm alone in this, I saw this series in reverse order. I saw Army of Darkness in the theater. Then I went backwards and saw Evil Dead 2 and then Evil Dead. And it doesn't really matter,
Yeah, me too.
But getting to Evil Dead was just like, oh my God, like knowing how cheap this movie was made and like, but the creativity on hand and just the pure like ferocity and intensity of the filmmaking and like, no, I don't want to say humor because this one's not very funny, but just the way they use the camera and the effects work. I've never really I know you've gone out and filmed stuff. I never really have, but this is the kind of movie where you watch it and you're like, why aren't I just out there with my friends making something like this? Because the enthusiasm of the project just oozes through in every shot. And it's not even like, yes, this did give us Ash, the Bruce Campbell character, but this is kind of like, proto Ash. It's not quite what we know of today with the character. So it's really not even about the character. It's just more about how insane the gore gets in the last half of this film and how nuts the cinematography is and the crazy camera angles, the I don't know, everything about this is like excessive in like the right way. And even, when I was young and saw this, it was just so like exciting to see a movie like this. And then, there's like wondering why there aren't more films like this. I think only like there's some directors who have that kind of their older films or, their films they made when they're younger, like Sam Raimi and Peter Jackson have this kind of energy to them that you wish they kept up throughout their career. And they never seem to. But this really speaks to that.
No, I agree 1,000%, and I the thing that always strikes me is I kind of cringe a little bit when I hear a lot of people say like, oh, like it's so like slow or it's so basic or it's so cheap that you can just start with Evil Dead 2 because it does the recap. But I mean, the recaps are cool the way they parts 2 and 3. I mean, don't get me wrong, but like I think this film, like, let's just take it out of the franchise just as one horror movie itself. I think it has a lot of charm. I honestly do. And like, I mean, just like, the stop motion shots that are in it, they're just, it's so fun. And one of my actually favorite scenes of the movie isn't even the crazy horror stuff at all. There's just something like the charm of kids making a movie part of like when they're in the car just driving up to the cabin in the beginning. Like I really like that scene, just getting and I really like the actors, which when they do the recaps in the next movies in parts 2 and 3, like they don't use all the same actors and stuff. So like, I mean, just for the whatever shits and giggles of it, like I'm all down to see Scotty or whatever his name was.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say, not only do they not use some of the actors, they just dump some of these characters and act like they weren't there. So yeah,
because isn't the most famous? I should say originally one of the most famous things about the original Evil Dead is like the tree rape and like was that Ellen Sandweiss? Is that her name?
Yep.
I don't even think that character's in the recaps, is she?
No, she's not. It's interesting because, we want to get into like an odd continuity thing. The recap of Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 acts like it was just Ash and Linda who came into the cabin.
Yeah.
But then when you get to Ash versus Evil Dead, the show, they do kind of once again come back to Cheryl being there with his sister and dying. So it's like, wait, what? I thought you were dumping that out. So who knows? Continuity is like a real non-issue in Evil Dead. So whatever. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I do like them two better. Evil Dead 2 is my favorite of the franchise.
Yeah,
but
me too.
But I don't think it's fair to take this one out because it is still a blast. And I've seen this just a few years ago in a theater, and it's we did like a Halloween air time, kind of midnight showing, and it still plays like gangbusters to an audience. It's just so fun, and I can't even imagine someone saying it's slow. I mean, yeah, it takes a bit to get going, but. Yeah. There's always, even in that early section, though, there is just a sense of dread that hangs over it that I think makes it feel like, even when there's not blood being tossed at you, you're still waiting for something bad to happen. And like you said, it is still interesting and compelling.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is just you can feel it when you watch the whole kind of nuts and bolts thing. Like, you can tell that cabin is not a set. It's not fake. It's not phony. Mm-hmm. You can tell that these are real people. It's a little bit of, in terms of the actors, I feel like it's a little bit almost more of the George Romero approach of using people that feel very real. And
Yeah, and it's even interesting too. I mean, even something as simple as some of the bigger, crazier moments in it, because you have to basically chop the Deadites into pieces to defeat them. So there's a lot of that. Yeah. And then we just think of horror in general and some of the most infamous horror moments in terms of the biggest kills. And yet something in this, like a pencil being stabbed into someone's foot, is still one of the most memorable, cringeworthy moments in any horror film.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, even before part 2 came out, it definitely had its cult reputation. I remember always seeing it either at video stores or seeing the poster around. And it is kind of a shame that so much I guess with parts 2 and 3 and then the TV series and then the remake obviously as well, but it's like it is even the remake's not truly a remake of this film. So anybody who thinks the original film is not like mandatory viewing for whatever reason, I think they're really missing out because for whatever reason, if you had to make a top 25 horror movies of all time, not counting 2 and 3, I think this still would show up on a lot of people's top 25 horror list of all time. And I love just the whole grueling terror tagline. I mean, I think it fits the film perfectly.
And if you're a genre fan, it is nice to go back and visit a baby-faced Bruce Campbell who is, the Bruce Campbell before Bruce Campbell got a little too full of himself and maybe bought into the Bruce Campbell image a little bit. And
exactly.
I love him. He'll always be he'll always mean something to me. But he is what he is nowadays, and that's a discussion to be had another time.
So Evil Dead, we love it. So I'm going to move on to my number 2 film, and this is a movie that almost, for some reason, when I was going through the list, I almost left it off just because I didn't see it. But this is a movie that really, I do think it's an excellent film, but I have to say it really rated this high on my list because of the rewatchability. And this is a film I've never heard anybody say that's infinitely rewatchable, but I think it is. So I'm going with the film Taps. And I feel like this movie was really regarded as an excellent movie for a long time, because it had so much great young talent in it. The main leads are Timothy Hutton and Sean Penn very early in their careers, and then the debut of Tom Cruise as well, who I think is excellent in it. Just really great, and it's not only is it, I think it's really great because it's not just like a kind of average movie that has a bunch of, George C. Scott's also in it, playing the headmaster of the school. But I think it's something that, to me, stands the test of time and is actually really relevant today, because basically the setup of it is it's a military academy where they, really drill into these, and you have kids all the way from, I would say, roughly age 10 to age 18 at this school. And Timothy Hutton and Sean Penn are kind of the elder kids at the school. And, it's very much a military hierarchy. They really train them like soldiers. They really instill the military mindset. just about honor and valor and whatnot. And basically, yeah, it comes down to it. It turns out they're basically like going to close the school and stuff. And basically the students decide to take a stand and basically, kind of take the school itself hostage, just in terms of they barricade the school. They actually have real weapons that they normally use in drills and whatever. I mean, and it's what I love about it, and why I think all these guys shine in it, is like it totally kind of asked the question, and without spoiling too much of what happens, like the film gets fairly shockingly violent towards the end, and really what it questions is, when you put this mindset, which just military training, it gets you in a certain set of mind. When you set that up into very young minds, like what are you really doing, and are you it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell a kid basically. Yeah, we instilled all these values and all these principles into you, but that doesn't really matter, because in real life there's such things as bureaucracy and financial decisions and whatever. So I mean, I just think this movie's like really, really electric in a way of just like. And it totally, that even from the beginning, once you see the students planning what they're going to do, and things go wrong, and next thing you know, the police are surrounding the school, and you got literally 12-year-old kids with automatic weapons pointing them at police. Like it's a movie for a lot of uncomfortable reasons. I don't think you could really make today either, but just as a drama, and it's just like, as somewhat of a shocker, and just like, and when I say a shocker, I don't mean like an exploitive way, but I don't know, I think if you watch this movie, it will get you thinking in a lot of ways, and and again, acting top notch. So I definitely recommend Taps to anybody who hasn't seen it, because yeah, it's a 1981 film, but like literally this could happen tomorrow. It's very believable that it could happen tomorrow. So I give it a really super high recommendation. And it's a movie I've owned on DVD for a number of years, Blu-ray now, and like it's a movie I could literally watch every single year and just never get tired of it.
Yeah, man, hearing you talk about it has me really itching to like revisit it, because it's a film that I do remember enjoying, but I don't think I've watched since maybe like the mid '90s. It's been a really long time for me. But yeah, I remember really being kind of taken with the performances, or Sean Penn being really, really good in it. And just like, I don't know, there's something about that time period. I guess in my head, I had to stop, and now I'm realizing these are kind of spaced out over time. But, you and I did the Chocolate War as like a commentary on here. And then, there's a film like Taps. And then you go into like, probably like 90 or 91, you get Toy Soldiers. And there's just like this, like, I don't know, people loved movies about all boy, like, all male academies at that time, and like the horrible stuff that can happen at them. But yeah, Taps it was quite good. I mean, I can't speak to it too much just because my memory is hazy, but I do remember really enjoying it, and now you have me wanting to revisit it for sure.
I mean, I really think you should, and it's the type of movie I think if you try to kind of hard sell it to somebody who's never seen it before. Like, I just think it's going to be hard for people to wrap their mind around how a movie that is about that subject matter could be really powerful. But when you watch it and you see kind of like how somber and sober it is, and how, it's really good. So I hope you do give it a rewatch here, sometime.
Or I'll just wait for the remake.
Don't wait for the remake, because it's never coming.
No, he's not going to do like a Zac Efron led remake or something.
That would be awful. And it's speaking of nostalgic terms, I really do think it's one of those things that even if you use the same script, everything, I don't know if you could quite capture lightning in a bottle again, because I think it is. I love Timothy Hutton. I think he's done a lot of cool movies. But his early work, I think, is some of his finest work, which is amazing, because he was probably about 20 years old when they made this movie. Sean Penn, I mean, you watch him in this movie, and he doesn't even have, like, the biggest part. He's kind of like the second lead of the movie, but he just, I don't know, he just stands out. You can tell what he was going to become. Cruise has a smaller role, but it's a very electric role where you're like, holy shit! Like literally, he got cast in a bunch more movies, his big movies that you know him for because of this. And also, it's like I just forgot. I'm pretty sure, yeah, Giancarlo Esposito is in it as one of the kids. So I mean, it just. I mean, forget about it. It's ridiculous. Ton of talent everywhere. In this movie.
You say it couldn't be remade, but let me pitch something to you.
Okay.
What about Taps, the weekly series on the CW?
Could it work? Yeah, I don't know.
I'd love to see how they would have to fit like the female characters in some way. Yeah, no, that's obviously just a joke. Don't write us angry letters. I'm kidding, people. I do not want Taps on CW. But to go back, just piggyback on something you said just really briefly, in terms of Timothy Hutton, shout out to Timothy Hutton having kind of a late career resurgence recently. And man, one of the highlights of The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix. He's so good in that. Yeah, and it was really exciting to see. And then he was also featured in a smaller part, but still, significant enough. He's in the Jack Ryan show on Amazon, and it was kind of exciting for me to see Timothy Hutton in those two shows that I watched in streaming services. And just because there was a period there where he kind of vanished a little bit, and I always thought that was disappointing because I'm like you in that I like Timothy Hutton, and I really felt like there was a period where I was like, how come this guy isn't in more stuff? Like even in films I'm not a huge fan of. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of The Dark Half, but I think he's really good in it, and yeah, it's cool to see him kind of coming back now, and I hope that continues and he gets some more work off of Hill House because he's really, really good in that.
Yeah, him and Henry Thomas are one of the main reasons I'm definitely going to check that show out, and probably sooner than later.
Oh, man, they play the same character, right? And
yeah.
I'll tell you what, man.
Because Henry Thomas is not a young man.
That is kind of weird. Like, it doesn't. It is true that I don't think once you get to a certain age, your appearance doesn't change that much as you age. But whatever. I will say though that's always a crapshoot when you do the thing in movies where you cast a young actor and then you cast the older person for the flash forward or whatever. And in a lot of cases, it doesn't really look like that person would grow into that. But man, when you watch Hill House, you'll have to confirm this to me. That might be the best example of that I've ever seen, because Henry Thomas could definitely age into Timothy Hutton. It's pretty perfect. And I don't know if they were watching each other's performance or what, but even just mannerisms and everything, it's dead on. So credit to the casting and credit to both of them.
Yeah, they're both excellent, and I think, and I'm happy because for some reason I had blanked out or didn't realize he was in the Jack Ryan thing. I think there was like a long period of time, and it's just like some actors bring a certain something to their acting. Sometimes, especially actors, I think like Timothy Hutton, he can bring a certain sense of measuredness and vulnerability to his roles. And I feel like for a long time they didn't quite know, or maybe just sign of the times type of thing. Maybe there wasn't a lot of parts for him like that. And, and I definitely enjoyed his fun kind of late 90s era when he got to do some fun kind of gangsterish stuff like City of Industry and Playing God. But, yeah, just and that is one good thing, I think, with these this abundance of TV now that's really interested in being in-depth and character-based, is I think this is going to be a very good time for actors like Timothy Hutton and Henry Thomas, and I mean, even Sean Penn has a Hulu show on. So I mean, I think a lot of these deep actors who mainly don't fit into the modern, big studio release type films, I think they definitely can, find their way into these TV shows where it's like, because now it's really not, actor star power hasn't really been a big deal the way it used to be in the past. And now it's kind of like, if you were somebody famous for basically not just being a star, but being actually a really good actor, I think like they kind of need you now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. All right, cool. So let me hit my number 2, and this is the one that maybe it'll be surprising to you. I don't know, or to others, because everything else on here, I feel like I said, were like the obvious choices. This one's maybe a bit more of a deep cut, although I think in the last few years it started to get more and more of a reputation in genre circles, at least. And this is actually a French-German film from 1981, obviously. This is Possession, the Andrei Zulawski film, starring Sam Neill and Isabelle Adjani. This is a movie that actually Bird, our good buddy Bird, occasional gravedigger here as well, introduced me to when him and I first started hanging out and became friends. I think I'd kind of maybe vaguely heard of it, but I wasn't too familiar. And I remember him saying, like, dude, I have to show you this movie. It's going to be one of your favorites. And I was like, oh, all right, whatever. And sure enough, the first time he showed it to me, I was like, you know what? That's one of my all-time favorites. Can't deny it. It was pretty instantaneous. And I've revisited a lot since then. It's one of those films that I love to introduce people to. And that's the great thing about these kind of films. When you have a favorite that's not as well known, you get to be the person who shows it to people for the first time. This is a very strange film, psychological horror, about a couple. Sam Neill is a spy who's coming back home after being on what seems to be a long mission. He's returning to his wife and young child. And there's this just instantaneous coldness between him and his wife, played by Isabelle Adjani, in an amazing performance. And there's just something obviously off about the relationship. And he starts becoming really suspicious of her and wondering why this disconnect seems to exist. And he starts to suspect that she's cheating on him. And boy, it's hard to even talk about this film because I don't want to spoil too much.
Right.
But you just kind of stick with it, and it's eventually revealed what is happening in their marriage. And man, I'm not going to spoil too much, but you definitely eventually get into some, supernatural kind of creature kind of elements that are very unexpected, and it ends up being a lot gooier of a movie than you might expect. But it's also like, I'm saying this, it's not a dumb B movie. It's actually a very kind of deep, heady film about relationships. Zulawski himself did this movie after going through like a very painful divorce, and this was kind of his response to that. And it's just a very brutal film in ways. And if nothing else, you have to see it for Johnny's performance, which is one of the all-time actress performances in a horror film. And even Sam Neill is giving a very strange performance in this, but I find it very captivating. He plays everything very overly theatric. And I've never seen him do another performance like this, but I love it. And I think we don't talk often enough about how Sam Neill is a real big MVP of genre.
No, he's great.
Like, it's people like Sam Neill, but we don't talk about, like, this and even something like Event Horizon and In the Mouth of Madness. Yeah. And why am I blanking on the one with him and Billy Zane on the boat?
Dead Calm.
Dead Calm, thank you. He's in a lot of great genre stuff that, and this is probably my favorite of that bunch. So definitely, if you haven't seen Possession, which I'm guessing a lot of our listeners haven't, track it down. Prepare to have your mind blown, because it will be. And you're welcome.
Yeah, I need to make time for. I acquired a copy of this actually from Jelly like a year, maybe 2 years ago, maybe probably more like a year and a half ago. He had bought a Region B copy that ended up he couldn't play, so he pretty much just gave it to me, and then I gave him a couple movies too that I had an extra copy of. And so I've had this sitting on and like where it is on my Blu-ray shelf, it's always poking out, and like, unfortunately, I don't know why, but between streaming and renting movies and going to the theater, I don't make that much time to get through all the stuff that I have in my own personal collection, even though I keep buying movies. And I need to watch the shit out of this. It's long overdue, because I've never, especially in our little mini circle of film friends, I've never seen anybody not give this movie a glowing recommendation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's pretty amazing, and I think you will love it, and I think the kind of people who listen to a show like this will love it. It's just something that it's not for every audience, but for people who have an interest in horror film or just cinema in general, because it is so interesting, and it is a film to be kind of pulled apart and analyzed afterwards. It's not a film with easy answers, so it offers you a lot for rewatches and just for mulling it over afterwards too. And I think everybody will be taken by the performances. So
awesome. So, we're coming down the home stretch of the top 5 here. Number 1, I'm, again, just rewatchability. Watch this movie a million times. Can't get enough of it. Love it. And I think a lot of it just has to do with not only the awesome special effects in it, but just the fun, kind of poppy, hilarious direction in it. Number 1 on my list actually is An American Werewolf in London.
Okay, that's that. Well, that's obviously the one I was talking about earlier.
Exactly.
It pained me to not have this on here, but yeah, I'm glad it's your number one then.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things where it's just and let me tell you, it was hard. Not also another one that kept creeping on my list was The Howling. Mm-hmm. And although I kind of do just overall enjoy this movie more than The Howling, I really like The Howling a lot. Like, I think there's certain sequences in The Howling that are just like executed to perfection.
No, I agree with you. I to this day kind of go back and forth on which one I like more, and I think it's always a question of I'm always aware that this is American Werewolf is the better film.
Right. But
there are periods where I think like Howling is maybe more fun and like more rewatchable. But I mean, whatever. That's who cares? They're both great. So it's an easy debate, because it's like there's no wrong answer. So.
But this film, American Werewolf in London, always gets my blood pumping because I love the beginning. I love when they're on the moors and all that. I love the attack scene. You kind of have your story block chunk of the movie where the character, develops his relationship with the nurse, and he kind of very, very similar to a lot of modern movies too, like things like, like Venom or Upgrade or whatever, where you have like this character who's like learning about this thing that he's going through, and it's this prolonged period of this affliction that he has. But really, just for me, like I don't know. I just love the way the film wraps up with the final rampage, and it just always, kind of like leaves me on a high note when the film ends on, it's kind of such a downbeat ending, but you have that fun poppy direction by John Landis where, it kind of ends on such a dour note, and then you get the credits with the fun kind of poppy version of, what was it, Blue Moon? It's like, the Blue Moon. Like,
well, of course, like there's that thing where every song in the movie has moon in the title.
Right, yeah. And it's just one of those things where, like, I don't know, there's just certain movies that just make me pop big as a fanboy. Than just like when you put a combination, the scene where the weird Nazi werewolf zombies invade and murder the family. There's just certain combinations of weird things that if a director does in a movie, it just like fucking drives me crazy as a film fan, and this movie definitely has many set pieces that are like that. And it's just one of those movies, no matter how many times I rewatch it and how, over the years I rewatch it, like, my opinion of it never, like, dips at all. It's never like, oh, you watch this and you're like, oh, this isn't as good as I remember. Like, it always hits the exact same notes every single time I watch it. So, yeah, definitely always going to be a huge supporter of American Werewolf in London.
Yeah, and Jenny Agutter very hot in this as well.
Yes. Very, to the point where it's just like... It blows my mind now because it's like, this is the lady that's going to show up in Captain America Winter Soldier. It's just crazy.
I always think what I find interesting about this film is there's an element of it that I'm surprised wasn't picked up on and used in more films following this, because there's often talk about how, because these are, these supernatural creatures are fictional. Sorry, folks. The mythology has a lot of play, and you can kind of, evolve and add on to it over time. Yeah. And we see that happen to where, like Romero creates the Living Dead version of zombies, and then those become like the kind of zombie that is very apparent in films. And again, watching the Eli Roth thing, they're talking about how, like, werewolves were certainly a part of mythology for a long time, but a lot of what we know of the werewolf comes from the Wolfman, what Kurt Simodiak added in with his script, like the silver and, the gypsy curse elements and everything. And I thought one of the most brilliant inventions to the werewolf mythos comes from this movie, and that's the idea of being haunted by the ghosts of your victims.
Yeah.
And I love that. Like, the Griffin Dunn stuff is great. It's one of the highlights of the film. And because, you always sell the werewolf thing as a curse, and I just thought that was such a great addition, that you have these mangled corpses following you around, kind of just like making your life hell because you murdered them. And I really wish more films had picked up on that. So...
Yeah, one of the great scenes is when, and I just love the long shot from like across the street, where because like you said, the Griffin Dunn character, his friend, keeps coming back to him and talking to him, and he keeps getting more and more rotted and whatever. And I just love the long, creepy shot of like from across the street where he's waving him into the porno theater to like come talk to him. I don't know why. And then it's just great once he gets in the theater. I think it's just all like a puppet at that point. Mm-hmm. But it just, that movie just has the combination of things. You know, the effects, the story, the directing, the editing, the music, it just never gets freaking old to me. I always love it.
Yeah. And I'm not typically, I don't know where you fall on this, but I'm not typically a fan of werewolves that just become kind of dogs. I always like wolf men, but the design of this one is so scary and so great that,
The face totally makes it for me, you know, and I love the way it moves, and it's obviously some type of animatronic, whatever, but just, And the fact that it goes on a rampage in the middle of, like, Piccadilly Square or wherever it is, I don't know. This movie is so memorable to me in so many ways.
It kills Bib Fortuna on the subway platform.
Oh, it really? The kind of tall, skinny guy?
Yeah, that's Bib Fortuna.
I never knew that.
So when we do our 1997 episode of this, where do you think An American Werewolf in Paris is going to fall in your top 5?
I mean, I don't like to do, like, spoilers for upcoming episodes, but, I mean, that's going to be number 1 as well.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the stuff they were doing in Microsoft Paint in 1997.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So my number 1 is my reasons for this are going to be very similar to my reasons for Evil Dead in terms of just, again, another film I find infinitely rewatchable. A film when I initially got it on, well, I think I had it on Laserdisc and then on DVD. It's something I rewatched a lot. And it is about just like Evil Dead, it's about that bringing a new kind of visual style to something and just kind of reinventing the genre. And so if Evil Dead did it for horror, this film did it for action. And this would be, well, depending where you live, it might be Mad Max 2 to you, or it might just be The Road Warrior. Yeah. God damn, this is a great action film. And, while out this controversial statement, and Goat and I could have an argument, it might not be my favorite Mad Max film anymore.
Uh-oh.
But I know, I'll just leave it there. But for what it is, it's
Trev, are you trolling me?
I'm not trolling, but It's definitely, look, I'll just say this, it's the highlight of the Mel Gibson era of Mad Max.
Okay, I can live with that.
Yeah, and it's just so great, and it's like, plot wise, simplicity itself, very, very sparse on plot, but just, man, all style. And just like the Snake Plissken thing, just a great badass performance from Mel Gibson. This is really the film that sets Mad Max as what we know it into place. Like I enjoy Mad Max, the first one, but when you go back and watch it, it's actually kind of interesting how it's not really what we think of for the franchise. It's not necessarily a post-apocalyptic movie. It's really just kind of a more traditional revenge film in a kind of, slightly lawless society. Yeah. But this really puts into place everything that not only became Mad Max, but became hundreds of imitators after this, especially from Italy. Man, Italy went Mad Max crazy.
It did.
But yeah, just the way everyone looks is memorable, and the action scenes. George Miller just, God, definitely one of the most interesting directors of all time, right? If you look at his filmography and just the variance of what he did, because he could go from making something like this to Babe to Witches of Eastwick. Just this strange variety. But man, when he sets his sights on directing action in a way that he wants to kind of reinvent the genre, the way they're putting cameras, just strapping them onto these cars and just driving super fast, no regard for the safety of his stuntmen. Some of the most amazing chase sequences and crashes you'll ever see on film. And I mean, I could just keep saying all this crap, but you all know it's just one of the best like sci-fi action films of all time. And I just think because I think it's so rewatchable because you don't get bogged down in like the story or anything. You just strap in and go for the ride every single time, and what a ride it is.
Yeah, and I can't even tell you from like a pop culture standpoint how much it really influenced like so much. It was like one of those movies where not like usually movies have kind of like an iconic scene that get parodied and everything, whereas like this movie, they get reflected out into other things. This movie just really just basically the world building, the setting that it was set in, the atmosphere was the thing that was referenced. I mean, Mad Max, the kind of that post-apocalyptic 80s style of punk rocker looking bad guy and just over the top shit. I mean, we could, from anything to Weird Science to something like Bellflower. I mean, I think The Road Warrior is definitely and not only just on like B movies, but also movies that came after, like higher budget action movies or whatever. I think this movie is a lot more influential as people give it credit, because a lot of times people say, "Oh, Mad Max this, Mad Max that," but what they really mean is the Road Warrior.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, for me personally, just for my personal money, I don't think the series, while the rest of the movies were very enjoyable, I personally don't think that this movie was really topped in a lot of ways. So I mean, yeah, it's definitely my favorite of the series. And
yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, it's I do prefer Fury Road, but it's such a slight, one over the other that it's one of those debates where I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to come in and argue with you too much about that. So
yeah, the impact that this, and maybe that's just it for me too, just the impact that this, we always say with something like a Halloween or something, we always say, well, the original is always the best because that's when it was fresh and original. And even though this is Mad Max 2 basically, because it is like quite different from the original Mad Max film, like this was the one that kind of smacked you in the face and brought the whole world alive and hit you, the apex of just that whole post-apocalyptic. I mean, whenever anybody says the term post-apocalyptic film, I always think of the Road Warrior, like straight off the bat. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's what they're thinking of too when they say it. Like this really did set the visual and just thematic and mood piece template of that. So you definitely see this like recreated a lot after this one. And it is interesting, like this. I don't know that it happens much anymore, where like there's one film that leads to a sequel, and then the sequel really kind of completely reinvents the thing and becomes what that franchise is. Right. And I think like another example that would be First Blood going into Rambo, but this is like another definite example that, like you said, like Mad Max is a cool movie, but this is what people are talking about when they talk about the series.
Yeah, I agree. So, what, not obviously Fury Road or Beyond Thunderdome, but outside of what movie do you think stole from the Road Warrior and did it the best, Trev?
Ooh, the best. I mean, I don't know. That's tough. I don't know about best. I think there's a lot that aren't very good that I actually do like. Because I talk about that, like I'm saying, those 80s films, like I like the goofy Enzo Castellari stuff, like the Bronx Warriors and, crap like that. New Barbarians movies like those are just really bizarre. And he said usually like where you feel that the copying is the visual style of the villains always have that kind of like punk look.
Yeah.
But so I'll kind of watch any movie that's a Mad Max ripoff and usually get some kind of enjoyment from it. I might roll my eyes quite a bit at how much of a ripoff it is, right. but it's kind of like that zombie movie thing where I'll still probably find a bad one enjoyable on some level.
Yeah, I think as far as like the more recent ones or whatever, not talking about like the direct straight ripoffs, but I thought one movie that kind of...
Ooh, I think I know what you might say. Are you going to... well, let me take a guess.
Yeah,
you're going like into more modern recent era. Are you going to say Doomsday?
Correct, Amondo.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think Neil Marshall definitely also played a heavy influence to John Carpenter, but I think really the third act of Doomsday does a really nice job of and that was years and years before we ever thought Fury Road could be a possibility,
Yeah.
And I think that did a nice job of kind of bringing that, that kind of Road Warrior-esque villain and kind of final chase together,
Yeah. Well, and as much as I do love Mel Gibson's Mad Max, I mean, it's kind of nice to have Runa Mitra to look at too, So
we need to bring her back and raise her profile. She's still working, but I feel like she should have been bigger than what she was. Honestly, I think she had a few A-list pictures where she was kind of like the action lead, and I thought she did a great job.
Yeah, did you ever see Highwaymen?
Oh yeah. Just actually rewatched it. Maybe 2 months ago. Yeah,
that's a pretty fun underrated movie.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
But yeah, she just had like a kind of multi-episode arc on Supergirl, and you're right, like I kind of had forgotten about her, and it was a nice being reminded of like, oh yeah, like I like her, and I haven't seen her in a while, and I agree, it would be nice if she could get a little bit of a little resurgence going.
I agree, and I mean, it's not like she's, somebody who was in their heyday 20 years ago. She's still fairly young.
Yeah, it's 42. Only I just looked.
Yeah, she could. I believe she could really do still action roles or whatever. I think Doomsday was probably her showcase. Is like really, But I also like the Underworld film she did and stuff. So yeah, Rono Mitra, give us a call. We'll try to resurrect your career for you.
Yeah, or just give us a call.
Just give us a call. We want to talk to you. Why not?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we hit on some good ones, but like we said, I think we got to do that horror spin-off 1981 horror films because
there's definitely a lot of films I did not get a chance to talk about here.
Yeah, too much meat left on the table for sure. Mm-hmm. So before we kick it off, I always like to like we did with the last one. I think this is kind of fun to list a movie from that year that you haven't seen, but either you always wanted to, or maybe you just recently found out about it, want to. And this one was a movie for me I really had no real knowledge of until I was kind of looking at the list for that year, and it looked interesting. I'm actually, Trev, I'm going to go with The Pursuit of D.B. Cooper. Starring Treat Williams as D.B. Cooper, and Robert Duvall, I think, is the guy ahead of the investigation. And the reason I really, D.B. Cooper is kind of one of those, it's kind of like an urban legend, but it's really not an urban legend because it really did happen. It's a guy who hijacked an airplane, demanded a ransom. He got the ransom. The plane took off again, and then he jumped out. And to this day, there's a lot of people who claim that there's no possible way he could have survived, let alone, whatever. But there's been, I actually watched a documentary not too long ago, believe it or not, about it. Just something I was flipping through on cable and caught a good chunk of. But it's just a fascinating case. And just reading the synopsis of this one, it actually kind of gives you the identity of D.B. Cooper, which has never really been validated. So I don't know how true this movie could really be based on, because we don't really know the real story of really who D.B. Cooper was and what happened afterwards. But it sounds like it really kind of dramatizes, what happened afterwards, and supposedly some accomplices he had. So and just the thought that Treat Williams, who, keep in mind, the year before in 1980, was literally just an extra in Empire Strikes Back, that he was a year later he was playing the lead in this film about D.B. Cooper. I found that interesting, and I was like, well, it's got to be halfway decent if it's got Robert Duvall in it. So yeah, I don't know if it's out on DVD or whatever. I got to do that research, but I actually really am curious now about The Pursuit of D.B. Cooper.
Yeah, I agree with you. The D.B. Cooper story is one that's always interested me. It's kind of known more today. It's often brought into different pop culture avenues where people love to have characters who were revealed to be D.B. Cooper. I know that was an ongoing joke in news radio, and Justified, a show I really like, eventually revealed one of its characters was D.B. Cooper. Wow. So it kind of keeps popping back up that way. I believe last year David Duchovny made a film called D.B. Cooper versus Bigfoot.
Yeah. I didn't realize that was a David Duchovny joint, but I did see that.
Probably not the most surprising revelation to find that out. But
yeah, when I first moved to California, in Burbank, California, obviously it's long gone, but there was a DVD and CD store that I thought was very cool called DB Cooper Stash, and yeah. I think since that's long defunct, if I ever opened up a store like that, I think I would call my store that as
well. Mine is, I'm gonna go on a limb, and I'm gonna say that I'm gonna guess you've seen this, because it's a kind of film that is shocking to me I haven't seen. And I think it's one that I was always aware of when I was younger, and maybe I was just like, yeah, I'll get around to it. And then I kind of forgot about it for a long time. And then doing this, I was looking over the list, and it popped out at me. I was like, oh, yeah, I never saw that, and I would definitely be interested in it. And that is Outland, starring Sean Connery.
Yeah.
Have you seen this?
Yeah, I have. It's been a million years, but I have seen it, actually. Yeah.
So it's like a bizarre. I don't know if it's bizarre. I haven't seen it, but it just seems like it would be the right kind of bizarre. It's like a retelling of High Noon on one of the moons of Jupiter, where Sean Connery plays looks like a federal marshal who is sent to like a mining outpost there and ends up getting involved in this whole kind of crazy sci-fi stuff. And I don't know, I watched the trailer and it looked like the right kind of, 80s sci-fi fun. The trailer ends with a guy's head exploding, so I thought that's pretty cool. And Sean Connery might not be the most likable person in real life, but I find him to be a compelling screen presence, and like when he plays these kind of badass characters. So I feel like I should probably get around to checking out Outland. It seems like I'm kind of even just looking at it as like, a Sean Connery sci-fi action movie set on a moon of Jupiter. I'm kind of surprised this isn't maybe more of a cult film nowadays. That it's something I kind of forgot about, and it's feels like something that would have that kind of following. But
especially in the atmosphere we kind of live in now, where we have a lot of just even popular podcasts that reflect on past movies, cult movies, what have you. I'll tell you, everybody's got this giant Zardoz boner, but like Outland is like the one movie, like I think I eventually caught it like on cable or satellite, like it was like years after it came out or whatever, but that was one that I saw a million times in every single video store I saw the VHS tape of Outland, and like I always kind of, in my weird mind, I kind of categorize it as being in this weird category of stars a little bit past their heyday, like not in terms of talent or anything, but just careers. I always put Outland and then Saturn III, which had Kirk Douglas, I believe, in it. Like they're just these weird movies you always saw in the video store that had like a really big star in them, but it's just like this weird like sci-fi thing where it's like somebody was doing coke and was just like, what if we do this and we do it in outer space? You know what I mean? Like, but yeah, and because Outland's actually directed by Peter Hyams too.
Yeah.
So I mean, Peter Hyams has had some wacky movies. Don't get me wrong, but I don't know. There's just something about him. He always does kind of stuff that traditional, like in this case, science fiction western. But he usually puts like kind of a unique spin on it from his films that I've seen.
He's one of those good. He's like one of the good examples of a journeyman director, right? Like there's no. You're never like, oh, I can't wait to see the new Peter Hyams movie. No. But you usually feel like you're at least in capable hands when he's behind the camera making something. Right. And he just said sometimes it goes off. Sometimes he makes an End of Days or something. But he also makes Time Cop. So
exactly.
That's
and then he made the movie Relic.
Yeah, well, like I said,
which by the way, I own Relic on Blu-ray. I enjoy the movie. I enjoy the novelty of seeing Tom Sizemore star in a movie. You listen to the commentary, because Relic is a bizarrely dark movie, and I don't mean in terms of subject matter, I mean in terms of there's nothing you can see on the screen. So it's like Tom Sizemore goes to like in the middle of the day to visit, I think it was Penelope Miller in that movie. Penelope.
Oh yeah, man, I haven't thought about her in a long time.
Yeah, and he goes to visit. I mean, it's like it's supposed to be the middle of the day, and like from the scene outside on the sidewalk to him walking inside this brightly lit huge museum. I mean, it's like the entire movie's being lit by a kid's nightlight. Everything is a dark shadow. Everything is insanely dark and colored in a kind of strange way. And, like, I listened to the commentary track on that, and he's like, I hate to use light. I hate to light my scenes at all. I'm like, I can really tell. I mean, any director who's, like, that kind of, like, out there with their philosophy, I don't know, interesting to me. Trev, I was curious if you came across this title. I can't necessarily say this is a movie I'm dying to see, but I've never heard of this movie. I believe it's actually a foreign movie, but the title just blew me away. I think you almost could do like a remake or something just based on the title. But there was this movie, this Romanian movie I saw on the list of 1981 films.
I know you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah, okay. The Oil, The Baby, and the Transylvanians.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of this movie before?
No, I never had, but I think like you, I instantly like clicked on it to see what that was, and I think like I was kind of like, oh, that doesn't sound like what I hoped it would be, you know.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's not what you want it to be at all. But I mean, the title is gold. I wish Wikipedia had more information about whether it was a hit or not.
Yeah, no, the one that I kind of came across doing this, that again, it's the same kind of thing where it's like, I don't know that I'm in a rush to see it necessarily. And from the way Wikipedia makes it sound, it doesn't sound like it would be very easy to see anyways. But I came across this foreign animated film called Grendel, Grendel, Grendel.
Oh, yeah, I saw that on the list.
Yeah, that is actually based on the John Gardner novel Grendel, which I actually am a fan of that novel. It's a retelling of Beowulf from the perspective of the monster Grendel.
Oh, wow.
And this was actually an Australian animated film, and Peter Ustinov plays the voice of Grendel. And boy, it sure sounds like I'm reading here, although completed in 1981, it was not released in U.S. theaters until the spring of 1982. Because of its limited appeal, broadcasting the film was largely restricted to art theaters and urban centers. And it's like, so like, I guess this very strange, you know, art film animated thing about Grendel. And I'm like, well, I kind of want to see that, but I'm guessing it probably never made it to DVD.
Right.
Certainly no Blu-ray of this. So I'd probably track that down, but you know, it's probably on YouTube. But,
yeah, I was going to say, you know, for that stuff that's insanely long out of print, YouTube sometimes usually comes through in a pinch.
Yeah.
But, this, again, you know, this is the second time we did one of these favorite movies of this year or that year, and I think definitely we're going to keep the train rolling, just because, at the very least, it's a lot of fun for me and Trev to do, and from the download...
As frustrating as this one was, you know?
Yeah, this one was like, you want to tear your hair out and go crazy. But yeah, from the download numbers, seems like you guys are liking it too, so I think we will keep this trend up. You know, we should say, just as we head on out here, like, if people are like, as an indication of how crazy this year was and what we were talking about, you know, it wasn't on either of our lists. Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yeah, and I thought for sure it was going to be on yours, and that also was the number one grossing movie. But like, that's why, you know, like I said, Trev, I mean, I love Raiders of the Lost Ark. I love it, but I had to go with that thing of like, what do I rewatch over and over and over, and
and go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's just kind of crazy, because to the point of, like, I always think of certain movie, like, when I think of a year, I always think of a certain movie, and like 1977, I always think of Star Wars. 1985, I always think of Back to the Future. 1989, I always think of Batman. 1981, I always think about Raiders of the Lost Ark, like, immediately, you know, comes off the top of my head. And, yeah, the fact that it just couldn't make it into my top 5. It's just crazy. Because, I mean, like, again, if we were talking about what some of the best movies of the year was, I think you pretty much argue, without a doubt, that was probably the best popcorn film of the year, for sure.
Yeah, well, that's one of the best popcorn movies ever. But that being said, why it probably didn't make my list, and here we go, hot take coming in. Sorry, folks. I'm always going to be a Temple of Doom kind of guy. So,
you know, I was thinking that too, and I clearly remember when Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, because I remember, and my cousin Derek, he became a huge nut of it, to the point where he was buying the hats and making his own bullwhips and all that kind of shit. But I remember we went to see it, and as crazy as it might like sound or whatever, I remember 2 movies, Raiders of the Lost Ark and Back to the Future. I remember going to see them, like, really not knowing that much at all, just knowing this is a movie with Harrison Ford, or this is a movie with Michael J. Fox, and that's where we're going to see it. And I think those 2 movies in general are the huge mega hit blockbuster movies that, like, when I saw them, they completely blew me away, because I kind of really had, like, I didn't know what to expect, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And they just surpassed expectations big time. So, yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah, insane. So we're on our way out. Trev, thank you for doing this, for taking the time to sit down and scour the annals of 1981 film history. I think this is one of the funnest things we've ever done for this podcast, or maybe any podcast, really. Like, it's always fun to do end of year type top 10 list or whatever, but I think sometimes it's more of a challenge to look at these past
what's stuck with you, you know?
Yeah. So definitely thank you. I want to say, obviously, everybody, thanks for listening. As always, I don't think it's going to drive any extra traffic to your show, because you get more listeners than we do on here. But please check out Trev's other podcast, the Days of Future I'm drawing a pace. Days of Future podcast, right?
Yep, you got it right. Days of Future podcast, examining the X-Men.
X-Men.
Yep.
Yeah, where him and his buddy Joe talk about all aspects of the X-Men. And I want to tip my hat to you guys because you have been doing that show solidly for, is it going on 3 years or is it 2 years? I think
3 years.
3 years, yeah. So, I mean, the fact that you guys continually, have kept up with the episodes, kept up with finding new content, and obviously you guys are huge fans, so there's always going to be something within that you're interested in. But yeah, I think I've heard probably a little under half the episodes, and I don't know, it's a good podcast, and I think I could really listen to you and Joe talk about anything. You guys are pretty good at the rapport and whatnot. But, you guys would never just, clear your throat into the microphone like I do.
Well, no, it's good to hear you say you could listen to us talk about anything, because we certainly talk about anything on that show. We go off topic a lot, but that's the fun of the show. Exactly. It was never meant to be the most analytical, hardcore X-Men show. It's meant to be two buddies talking about the X-Men. So, glad you like it, and thanks for the plug. And check it out if you'd like to, folks.
So everybody, thanks again. Trev, thank you. Would you send us out on a high note to give one poetic line about the year 1981 in films and what it meant to you?
Well, I mean, it didn't mean much to me at the time because I was a baby. But I will say, there is something, sometimes, you and I have gone back and forth on this a lot about me sometimes poking fun at you for maybe overvaluing, 80s films and, to the expense of other eras. But boy, man, you sure look right when when you look back at a year like this and you go oh yeah, those movies, those years were insane. And I'd say the amazing thing about looking over this list is just how many of these films I just grew up on, right? How many of these movies were so important to me as a kid, and that's what's really fun about going back and looking at them. And I think maybe there's no better thought that let's set everyone out on the idea of 4-year-old goat sitting in a theater watching Reds. That's
that's something that happened. So, that's something I still remember. I mean that's crazy that happened. So 1981. Everybody, thank you. Thanks for joining us and helping us keep the memory of so many great films alive. Thank you, and we'll see you next time in the Movie Graveyard.
See ya.